With President-elect Joe Biden just days away from the Oval Office, all eyes turn to a pair of Georgia runoffs with control of the U.S. Senate squarely in the balance. Here at home, in the face of massive upscale development, a growing outcry from East Side residents fearful of being priced out of their barrio. And nearly a year after that deadly Spring Branch explosion, city leaders push through new safety restrictions on local companies who handle and store hazardous materials. I'm Greg Groogan, and welcome to What's Your Point, where our panelists call it like they see it. Let's greet them. Starting us off, former Houston City Councilmember Sue Lovell. Next up, Charles Blain, founder of Urban Reform. In the 3 spot, Bob Price, associate editor at Breitbart Texas. Batting cleanup, well-known businessman and columnist Bill King. And closing us out, longtime super neighborhood leader Tomaro Bell. Let's begin. The stakes simply cannot be overstated. In 9 days, voters in the state of Georgia will decide through its pair of Senate runoffs whether President-elect Joe Biden will have absolute control of our nation's government or whether Republicans will retain a foothold of power in the upper chamber. On the one hand, a Democratic sweep in Georgia would allow the new administration to more swiftly reverse much of what our outgoing President Donald Trump has done over the past 4 years. On the flip side, a Republican-controlled Senate would serve as a moderating firewall against an across-the-board Biden agenda, much like the democratically controlled House has been for the past 2 years with President Trump. Panel, at a fundamental level, if the Democrats win, they won't have to compromise. But if they don't, both parties will have to negotiate nearly every phase of government to get anything done. Charles Blain, what's your take on this?
I think you hit the nail on the head. The country has reached this fever pitch in the past few months of just arguing, and I think what people are looking for is a little more balance. And I think that the candidates in Georgia need to sell Georgia voters, but also the country on this idea that if the Republicans win, they can keep this balance and they can push back against some of the things that are going to come out of this administration. Biden tries to sell himself as this pragmatic, middle-of-the-road Democrat, and whether you believe that or not, we all know that the progressive movement within the party is going to pull the administration to the left. And so we need a Senate that's going to be able to push back against that if Americans are going to have a more balanced and nuanced approach to policy moving forward.
Bill King, my theory is that moderates in the suburbs who didn't like Donald Trump would like the idea of a Republican firewall in the Senate.
Yeah, my guess is that the Republicans hold those 2 seats down there. The polling is really close, but runoffs are incredibly difficult to poll. It's sort of interesting. A lot of the big pollsters are not even polling that race because they've kind of thrown up their hands on it. Emory has got the Republicans up a little bit. Typically Republicans do better in runoffs elections, so I kind of think they'll hold. Certainly the markets are thinking that. You can see with where the stock market is, they're discounting any kind of Democratic sweep. I'm not sure it's quite as significant as people think, because you've got some senators like Manchin from West Virginia, who's pretty conservative, is not going to go along with court packing and some of these other things. So, look, I think the country likes divided government. It's what we've had, I think, 37 out of the last 50 years. So I kind of think that's what we'll have again.
Tomaro Bell, you have friends all over the country, and I expect you have some in Georgia. What are you hearing?
Yes, I do have some parts of my heart in Georgia. And let me be clear about this. When you talk about having a firewall, having a protection from somebody running rimshot, like what we've seen, people want to know, if you do not win and you have a Republican Senate, are they going to use it to try to recount the election again? Are they going to use it to try to invalidate millions of voters across states that they don't even live in, that are not even relevant? What are you going to get? Because what people are sick of is the arguing and the pettiness, I mean it, and the malicious acts that they've seen since the election. So let me tell you, I'm telling you right now, I hope Warnock does well. I hope he does. I really do. Because what I really want to get back to is what they've lost, and that's civility and care for the people in America. And that's the truth.
Bob Price, I know that Dan Crenshaw from here in the Houston area has been in Georgia the past 2 weekends. I expect high-profile Republicans from across the country are descending on the Peach State.
I think there's a parade of Republicans coming through there trying to stir up the base, and it really is going to take that to get every voter to turn out. Nothing has changed in Georgia in terms of the way they're processing the election. And so the very same things that caused it to flip from Trump to Biden could cause it to flip from Republican to Democrat in these Senate races. And that leaves Kamala Harris sitting in the catbird seat as the president of the Senate to split a 50-50 tie on any vote that comes up that would end up that way. That, and not to mention that you're going to add 2 senators that make Kamala Harris look like a conservative. And that's hard to do. So it's critical that every Republican voter get out there and vote and drag everybody with them to the polls, make sure that happens. We cannot allow those 2 seats to flip. All it takes is a 50-50 split, but I say let's take both of them.
Sue Lovell, you're a pretty good political handicapper. How do you see this race going down?
I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. We'll see on Election Day. I know the Republicans are having to overcome the fact that President Trump has said there's voter fraud and essentially don't trust the vote and tell people you can't go cast your vote and trust that it'll be counted. My take is the Democratic Party is not going to go to the left at all. And these 2, if they win, aren't going to be the tipping point to take the party to the left. The party's going to stay in the middle. And the thing is, I don't think people want anybody's going to go be an obstructionist. I think who's going to be moving things in Washington are from the Republican side and the Democratic side are the moderates. And we're seeing that happen right now where they're getting together and moving together and doing it. And I think the more that we can add to moderation, the more we can move forward, the better it will be. And the things that will get done that we need to get done for the country.
Charles Blain, can Donald Trump himself campaigning in Georgia make a difference? And what about the hijinks of Lynn Wood and others?
Yeah, I mean, I think the president coming out can make a difference. There are a lot of folks there. We've got these weird factions. You have some people who are, uninterested in voting because of one reason or another. They feel that their vote might not count because of election fraud, or they just feel that they don't align with the Republican Party right now. But there is a solid portion of Republican voters who listen to the president and who might otherwise not go vote because they don't feel their vote would count. So if he comes there, continues to come, and continues to encourage them to come out, I do think it can make a difference with Republican voters. I wish all the Republicans who are going to be advocating in Georgia were all on the same side. I think there's a lot of argument and infighting going on within the party there. But I think it will play a big role if he continues to urge those folks to come out and vote.
We're going to leave it there. Up next, his days numbered. President Trump is literally changing our government's rules, dozens of them. We're going to debate the considerable fallout after the break. In what can only be described as a head-spinning flurry of activity, the outgoing Trump administration is jamming through dozens of what critics call anti-immigration, anti-environment, and anti-consumer governmental rule changes. Examples: narrowing eligibility for asylum seekers, making it more difficult for Americans to qualify for disability benefits, reducing federal payments to states hit by major disasters, weakening enforcement of the Clean Water Act, and lowering the number of people qualifying for food stamps, that is, just to name a few. Panel, in another unprecedented move, the Republican-controlled Senate has confirmed more than half a dozen Trump judicial nominees to lifetime appointments during the lame duck session after the election. I'm going to go to you, Bob Price. Is this normal or is this acceptable?
Well, it's absolutely normal, and you've seen this in every administration on their way out the door. They make changes, they make appointments, the Senate tries to get things passed, all of that happens. But the big difference is, prior to President Trump, those executive orders could simply be undone by the next president coming in and writing a different executive order. What we saw in Trump's case is he would try to undo some of the things that President Obama did, and the courts would come back in and say, no, you don't have the authority to change that. Well, why not? That's kind of the ridiculousness that was going on in there. So we're going to see a lot more of these things going. You're going to see a lot of pardons that you always see coming out at the end of an administration. One of the big orders this week was about changing the architecture of new buildings going up, that they have to be traditional architecture. So, a lot of it is kind of like, okay, let's get it done. But on the meaningful things, I think he's going to try to leave his mark, and then it'll be up to the Biden administration to see what they're going to do.
Bill King, all these rule changes, is this normal activity? And will the Biden administration be mired down for a year trying to change it all?
Well, obviously, if they're regulations, for the most part, the new president will be able to unwind those things. There's sometimes they're judicially challenged, but for the most part, the administration's got a lot of discretion on that, and I think you'll see them immediately start to roll back some of these things. Now, the judicial appointments are extremely consequential because those can't be undone. Those are lifetime appointments. And I actually think one of Trump's, most meaningful legacies, whether you like it or don't like it, are going to be his judicial appointments. And certainly getting 3 Supreme Court picks was huge. I think it's sort of interesting the fact that, people were thinking that, well, they're going to side with him on all these election contests when they're just not hearing any of those things and summarily dismissing them. Don't ever think because you put somebody on the Supreme Court, they're going to do exactly what you want them to.
Okay, Sue Lovell, I was reading that Trump has appointed something like 40% of the sitting U.S. district judges on the bench right now. That is a pretty big legacy.
It's a huge legacy, and there'll be consequences that will be for some of them for decades as to those appointments. They were very, very smart in what they did in filling those. The ones I think the regulations, they can be undone. I think it'll be really interesting to see who he pardons and who he doesn't, because those can't be undone either. And I'm wondering when they're going to roll those out, if they'll wait to the last moment. Who will they be? Will he pardon himself? Will he pardon his son-in-law's father? I think those everybody's waiting to see what he's going to do on that front. The other stuff, some can be undone, but the judicial appointments will have consequences for years and years and years to come.
Okay, we're going to leave it right there. Coming up, in the wake of a deadly explosion, Houston leaders tighten regulation of businesses working with hazardous materials. Could this latest move prove the first step towards zoning in the Bayou City? A deadly action triggers what some would call a long overdue governmental reaction. Spurred by the disastrous Watson grinding explosion in Spring Branch nearly a year ago, Houston City Council has begun tightening its hazardous enterprise regulations by in part prohibiting their construction and operation within 1,000 feet of parks, community centers, libraries, and churches, as well as closing a loophole which had allowed some businesses to avoid oversight. Panel, the mayor and council have signaled more restrictions are coming. Is that a good thing or yet another drag on a sputtering economy? I'm going to start with you, Tomaro Bell.
Now, I think it's a very good thing because we do not have zoning in the city, so you have to give communities some form of protection. The Watson grinding incident was an eye-opening experience because it was surrounded by residential properties, and those people had no idea that that plant had something that could literally take their houses off the foundation in a second. This is not the first time communities have suffered because they didn't know what was in a warehouse. In Pleasantville, they had a tire fire years ago that burned for days, and they were all on lockdown, and the people got sick and everything. So I'm very happy to see that the city is looking at, in some way, helping people decide what they live next to or what is in the factories, the warehouses, and the storages that they're next to.
Charles Blain, is this an urban reform that makes sense?
I think it is, and I think we have to give credit to, particularly Councilmember Amy Peck. If we remember, this happened days after the new council was sworn in, and government moves slow. And so the fact that we're less than a year away and they're passing regulations that are going to protect the district, I think that's something to applaud them for. So I definitely want to give congratulations to Councilmember Amy Peck. And as to your point about zoning, I just don't see that happening. Houston has remained affordable because we have that flexibility and we don't have a formal zoning code, and there are protections in place, deed restrictions restrictions. Houston's actually one of the only cities that allows the city to enforce deed restrictions through its legal process without having civilians go through a legal process themselves and pay for it. So we do have restrictions in place, so I don't think we need zoning, and I hope that we do bring about more reforms that will protect communities such as this, but I don't think we need a formal zoning code.
Bill King, can this kind of incremental regulation be a weight around the necks of small businesses?
Well, this new ordinance was actually pretty anemic. I mean, the only thing it really did was it added some kinds of protected businesses within the 1,000-foot range. And it also said if you stored hazardous things outside, you would be regulated. That was really the substance of it. Now, it did set up a review committee, which I've lost track of the number of new committees and commissions this administration has set up. You know, in my church, we have a saying that for God so loved the world, he did not send a committee, because that's something that's going to be, that's where something's going to die for sure. And that sure seems like to me what this is all about.
Sue Lovell, you know a little bit about this subject. Do you think this is the end of it, or there'll be more regulations coming?
Well, first, let me say committees are the Bermuda Triangle of city government. I think this is great because what it really is about public safety. That in neighborhoods, that things aren't stored like Watson that can harm the neighborhood and people there and other places. But it also helps our first responders, particularly our fire department. I mean, to send people running into an incident or a fire when you have no idea what's in there, what can explode, what harm it could do is really vitally important for the fire department, and it's really good for them. So I think this doesn't in any way lead towards zoning. I don't believe we'll ever have zoning, but it is a good public safety step for neighborhoods, also for first responders to know what they're dealing with, so they can also put the incident out and take care of it a lot sooner by knowing what it is they're fighting.
Bob Price, you've done business in the city of Houston. You know lots of small business people. Could this hamper their efforts to come back from the pandemic if there are more and more regulations?
Well, any regulation is going to add to the complexity of trying to recover your business, but there are some regulations that need to be put in place. You know, the interesting thing I think about this is this explosion was less than a year ago, but because of the pandemic and the high crime rate and everything else that's going on in this city, it seems like it was a lifetime ago. I was actually living about 4 miles away as the crow flies from that plant when it blew up, or that business when it blew up. And, you know, that's a little too close for comfort, but it shows how quickly things change. Is this just window dressing the city council's doing, some feel-good legislation? You know, we'll see as time progresses, but I think that it is very important, particularly for firefighters, other first responders. Firefighters die of cancer at a much higher rate than any other profession in the country because of the toxic chemicals that they're exposed to in these fires. They need all the protection they can get, as do the neighbors of these businesses.
Okay, got to leave it there. Just ahead, as more and more Houstonians die at the hands of violent criminals free on bond, victim advocate Andy Kahan's outcry for accountability just grows louder. Our one-on-one conversation is coming up after the break. Over the last 9 months, highly regarded crime victim advocate Andy Kahan has been sounding the alarm to anyone willing to listen. Armed with irrefutable court records and decades of knowledge, Kahan has compiled a growing list of 79 murder victims whose lives have been ended by violent criminals released from jail on bonds issued by so-called reform judges. We spoke in depth about the growing death toll.
For the first time, we had an offender who was released on a capital bond murder, released on bond, and that was almost unheard of years back. You would never get out on a capital murder bond. Now it's routine. This is the first time I've seen one who's been released on bond who's now charged with another capital murder. This time it's an 11-year-old boy. And the lack of outrage, not just from the community, but by elected officials, public officials, or by people who should be looking out for public safety, which has to be the top priority of government, is mind-boggling to me, that it's almost like 76 plus people are considered what I would call collateral damage under the guise of criminal justice and bond reform? How many of our citizens have become victims of violent crime by defendants released on multiple felony bonds? I don't know. Keep in mind, Greg, I'm just looking at murder right now. God only knows. Aggravated robbery, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and so on and so forth. We should want to get these answers. Yeah, we do have an axe to grind. Absolutely. I totally agree with Judge Hidalgo's representation of myself and Crime Stoppers. Our axe to grind is what's beneficial to the citizens of Harris County, is felony bond reform, which is not court ordered, unlike misdemeanor bond reform. But whatever reason, we're seeing the district court judges, give out bonds like you were giving out candy on Halloween. But as a victim advocate, I deal with families, and I can't tell you what it's like to have to talk with families who have just lost a loved one to murder, and then to find out that the defendant had been repeatedly released on felony bonds, and I got to tell them, I'm so sorry for your loss. It's a tragedy, but it was so utterly preventable because the defendant shouldn't have been out to begin with. When I take a look at the 76 names of the victims of felony bond reform, I can unequivocally tell you a majority, if not all of those, never, ever should have happened because the defendant shouldn't have been out in the community to commit these types of acts. There used to be an adage. It was one bond per customer. You were out on bond and you were charged with another crime, guess what? You weren't getting out again. That's not happening, and that is one of the primary reasons I do believe that you have a major spike in your crime rates in Houston, is the revolving door at the courthouse. What we're saying is enough, and since obviously it's not going to be happening through local control, sadly we're going to have to see legislative updates. We're going to have something enacted in order to prevent what I call the Harris County bond pandemic.
Up next, we place Andy Kahan's call for criminal justice accountability front and center. The What's Your Point crew is set to discuss the human cost of felony bond reform and the growing collateral damage. Welcome back. It's been a frequent topic on this show, the alarming number of Houstonians killed by criminals released on bond despite their documented history of violence. You just heard victim advocate Andy Kahan squarely blame local reform judges for what he believes is completely preventable carnage. I'm going to go to Bill King. You've studied this issue a little bit. Is Andy hitting it on the head?
I'm going to tell you what, thank God for Andy Kahan. Otherwise, we wouldn't know about this. I am stunned that this is not the lead story on every newscast every night in Houston. I'm ashamed of my former employer, the Houston Chronicle, for refusing to cover this. I mean, the story that Andy just told in his interview about an 11-year-old little boy who is murdered by somebody out on a capital murder bond. We've never even heard of this kind of thing going on before. And what I really find amazing about this is the victims of this are almost exclusively members of the minority communities, And we have these judges that are down there supposedly trying to help poor people, and they're letting out criminals. These are hardened criminals. These are not people that are passing bad checks. These are not people that are picked up for shoplifting. These are people that are committing murders, capital murders, that these judges are then letting out on bond. It is reprehensible, and we've absolutely got to make sure these judges do not get reelected when they come up.
Tomaro Bell, Andy Kahan made it very clear that this isn't court-ordered misdemeanor bond reform. This is completely voluntary.
Look, I agree with Andy Kahan, and I want to echo Bill. Thank you so much, Andy Kahan, for being out there in the front and fighting and making sure that we know about this. I have already said on this show, many viewers watch it because they say we are the only ones bringing local news locally. Local news is almost abandoned the city, and this is a critically important and very important topic. This is about life or death. You say you're about public safety and quality of life. Well, what kind of quality of life is it that you can't even walk to the damn grocery store without worried about if you're going to be able to make it back home? And this case about this 11-year-old, I mean, there's a problem. And I'm going to say it here, and I'm going to say it it again. I believe in bail reform for misdemeanor checks and for the fact if your light is out busted, you shouldn't lose your house. I damn sure don't believe in bail reform when you're talking about people committing murder and violent crime. And these judges cannot justify this. I don't care if you're scared of a commissioner around a horseshoe. If you're scared of him, hell, don't run. Because you're supposed to be running on your own 2 feet, not his feet.
Charles Blain, you do work in prisons. You've studied this issue. If we stop felony bond reform, are we kind of stopping an important experiment? Because there has been collateral damage.
I mean, I don't, it's the collateral damage thing. And I know you don't mean it like this, and neither did Andy Kahan, and I think he clarified when he said it, but it is collateral damage, but ultimately these are lives, right? So these experiments that we continue to pursue, someone is at the receiving end of that, and we're dealing with that, and we can't just risk public safety and try these experiments. And so, there's a way of going about bail reform. Like Tomaro said, we can do misdemeanor bail reform, but we need to take our time and make sure that the things that we do are not reversing what the gains that we've made over the years. And I think Bill makes a good point, is that a lot of these victims are minorities. And I bet you, I promise you, that if every single one of these cases was happening in Memorial, in Tanglewood, in River Oaks, and other parts of town, they would be the lead stories every single night. And it's a problem that they're not. But I think another issue is that what we've seen a lot of, especially during this era of criminal justice reform, is a lot of anger directed towards the police department. And in this last election cycle, we saw a lot of the blame for crime directed towards the DA's office. There is not much public information, or there's not an educational campaign out there directing people to the judges. And that's where we need to be looking and holding accountable.
Sue Lovell, in my conversation with Andy Kahan, he compared this time to the late 80s and early 90s when inmates, criminals were serving only 1 day of 10 of their sentence because of prison overcrowding, and they were streaming back into the city, and it was lawless. Do you see a comparison?
I do, and again, let me thank Andy. It's no surprise he'd be out front. Here's what I think is significant right now. At least finally people are understanding that it is the judges that set bail, not the district attorney's office, which got all muddled during the last election. First thing, judges set bail. Second, I would like everybody in the news media, anybody that's writing, anytime you mention a judge, you give the court number, let's start giving them their name. If they want to make these kind of decisions and put people back out, then put your name to it. So that's what I'm calling upon. I think that we can get a handle, and when people go to vote, they will know who to vote for and who not to vote for. When you start hearing judges' names who let felons go, who let people that are on a death penalty go, put a name of the judge to what they've done in their action.
Got to leave it there. Still to come, maintaining the rule of law amid a deadly pandemic. We're talking with Harris County District Attorney Kim Ogg about the daunting challenges confronted in 2020. For Kim Ogg, the chief law enforcement officer in the nation's third largest county, it's been one heck of a challenging year. A deadly pandemic triggering joblessness and more crime. A judicial system forced into virtual space, and the mass postponement of trials. Reform-driven judges discarding her prosecutor's pleas for high bonds on repeat violent offenders. An ongoing major investigation into police corruption, and to top it off, ensuring the integrity of the most consequential general election in recent history. We talked one-on-one.
I think that the election fraud work that we did is some of the most important work that's been done in America. And with the propagandizing of the election, the attacks on the post office and their credibility, the concern about COVID, whether it was real, we felt collectively as a group of elected people in Harris County that protecting our election process was as important a duty as existed. And so a group of us came together, and while we are elected partisans, our job is nonpartisan. And finding out who was behind some of the biggest lies during this last election will prove fruitful for the next one and will help keep us free, because it will keep our elections uncontaminated by criminals who will do almost anything for money. But I think as we go forward into the next year, this bond issue, repeat violent offenders out on the streets to kill others, is going to be front and center in criminal justice reform. And I continue to believe that reform and public safety can coexist in the same space, that it's entirely possible to protect people and be fair to them at the same time. When it comes to letting out repeat violent offenders on bail, I've got to say I'm going to help them do their job by naming names. I think it's important the public know who's responsible, and it's judges. We're going to clear out this backlog. It's not going to be done in a fortnight, but it is going to get done. We are triaging our cases. I'm imploring the judges to work with us on better, more effective scheduling, and they've got to resume jury trials. We see 1-2 judges picking up with jury trials. This can be done safely through remote testimony and technology, and I'm actively working with the judges to encourage them to do that. That's the way we get through our backlog. And finally, I'd like people to start normalizing their at-home behavior a little more. The domestic violence rates are through the ceiling. A little more counseling, a little less violence, would help everybody. So I'd encourage over this holiday season for everybody to act reasonably, think reasonably about the people they say they love, and let's try and get our domestic violence rate down as a community.
When we come back, with billions of development dollars set to pour into Houston's 5th Ward, longtime residents fear they'll soon be squeezed out in a tsunami of gentrification. Welcome back. Disturbing protests are beginning to ring out from Eastside residents and small business owners who fear multi-million-dollar high-end development along Buffalo Bayou in 5th Ward will eventually price them out of the neighborhood they love. With billions of dollars of construction currently slated, the project comes with a community benefits agreement reportedly to economically aid existing residents with jobs and affordable housing. But panel, many residents feel completely powerless and don't trust the 5th Ward Community Redevelopment Corporation to deliver any genuine protection for their historic barrio. I'm going to go to you, Tomaro Bell, because I suspect you know something about this.
Yes, sir. I've gotten many calls asking me about this. And I'm going to tell you, being in the position I am, I listen to people about their communities, but I let people run their own communities. And I'm going to tell you, some of the people who generally run 5th Ward, even they are questioning this because they feel left out. They feel they didn't get involved, a voice in. They figure that they are definitely going to be gentrifying 5th Ward and that they will not be able to afford those properties at all. They don't believe they were included in the design. They don't believe any other. Okay, first off, let me be clear. The promises that were made with the developer are you could try, not you will do. And nobody trusts you can try.
All right, Bill King, you follow this stuff pretty closely. What's going on down there?
Well, the development that they've got planned is a beautiful development. I'm a little skeptical about whether it'll ever happen. All of this stuff was put on the drawing board when people were flooding in and wanting to live close to town, and now that dynamics have been turned on its head. These redevelopment corporations around Houston have, let's say, a checkered past, and this one in particular has that. A lot of insider deals, a lot of developers making a lot of money. They had a project that proposed in this particular one I looked at a couple of years ago where 40% of the costs were in soft costs, engineering fees and developer fees and lawyers and accountants and all that. I'm skeptical about how this will be executed.
Hey, Bob Price, I'm not going to tell everybody where your lovely country home is, but do you think big projects like this they have a future?
Well, I think Bill's exactly right. I think people all over the country are looking at, is this urbanization of America been a good thing for us or not? Now you've seen a dramatic example of why maybe it's not, and you're seeing mass exodus right now, particularly in Houston, of people moving out of the country. Real estate is selling like hot potatoes out here. Houses are going up in value like nobody's business. And it's because people are fleeing from the city. They've learned that they can work remotely, that they can carry out their jobs from wherever they are. I can do my job from anywhere in the world as long as I've got an internet connection. So it all works. But these projects that you see are a natural evolution of the cycle of life in terms of these neighborhoods. It's how you rebuild your tax base, how you rebuild your community and keep it fresh.
Okay, Sue Lovell, you know something about gentrification. You've seen it happen in various neighborhoods, the battles that have happened, seen it done successfully and unsuccessfully. What's your take on this?
The quickest way to be unsuccessful is not to go to your neighborhood groups, not take the time to sit and listen to the neighborhoods and the people that have invested. That's their investment too, and they're trying to protect their investment. To treat it like it's not important is a huge mistake to make, because it is good if you get development people that move in. But the way to do it is to talk to your neighbors, to talk to everybody, let everybody know what's going on, keep an open line of communication. And I think that they really did this very poorly, and they have time to come back and redo it, and should do it, and should listen to people that live there.
Yeah, maybe we'll send them your phone number. Anyway, Charles Blain, as you've watched this conversation unfold, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of communities do these, or a lot of agencies do these community benefit agreements, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the community is invested and informed about what's happening. And so I think with this, they need to take the time, and they should have taken the time to really bring the community in. I did hear one thing out of this where there were some community members who tried to file open records requests to get an idea of kind of the full-fledged plans and everything, and that kind of stuff was rejected. So when they're not getting the entire picture of what you're trying to bring into their community, I understand why there's hesitation, why there's pushback. So more community involvement is always better.
Okay, Tomaro, 20 seconds. 20 seconds. Did these guys mess up in the way they dealt with the neighborhood folks?
Well, one thing about this is, I gotta tell everybody, you may love lobster, you may love steak, but if you get it on a damn garbage top, you ain't gonna eat it. So it's all in how it's presented. All
right, we're gonna leave it right there. Up next, he's the Houston Democrat who waged political war against President Trump from almost day one. With a new administration set to enter the White House, Congressman Al Green lays out his expectations. For longtime Houston Congressman Al Green, the coming year offers real potential for two critical outcomes: genuine relief from the pandemic for the people he serves, and a sea change in national leadership that will reverse the stubborn American malady of racial injustice.
Many people monitor the stock market. Well, in my district, I have to monitor the supermarket. And I know that the prices are going up, and my people want to make sure that they can fend for themselves and feed themselves. So we have to have a stimulus to help them with the food.
What are your hopes in terms of getting the vaccine out expeditiously to as many people as possible?
In my district, we still have some persons, and I'm speaking of the African American community now, who remember the Tuskegee episode. I need not go through it, but that still lingers in the memories. And I think that we have to educate people. It's very important that we embark upon this campaign to educate, which is what you're doing now. Let people know that this is something that is important, that it would be a benefit to them.
Congressman, on January 20th, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be sworn in as the next president and vice president of this United States. You worked for their election. You believe they are the leadership we need at this point in time. What are your expectations for them?
My expectations are quite high. I believe that we would want them to honor the commitments that have been made, and we'll get back to America as usual. Not with discrimination, but wherein we can fight discrimination. Not with the lack of jobs, but wherein people will have opportunities. Not with the lack of good health care, but wherein the government recognizes that health care is something that you should have simply because you're sick and you're a child of God and you need help.
Congressman Al Green, thank you for your service. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you. Merry Christmas and happy holiday.
my honor to be with you, and I'm a big fan of your program.
Thank you, sir. Just ahead, we go to the other side of the partisan divide and hear Republican Congressman Dan Crenshaw's aspirations for the legislative year to come.